Good evening and welcome to the Rochester Board of Education. This is our first round of budget deliberations. Today is Tuesday, April 14th. As we enter this discussion, I do want to do a little level setting and acknowledgement of a few things for both the commissioners as well as the community so that we're all on the same page as we move forward this evening with the conversation. So I want to start with, first and foremost, what we'll be focusing on, which is the academics and programs section of the budget book. Any previous superintendent presentations that included the budget over the past few months, we're going to be asking questions around that. We also received the state monitor's academic plan, or budget presentation, should I say, on March 26th. That too can be included as we look to gain understanding. And then, of course, we have our budget book here with us. My understanding is that between pages 11 and 58, we'll find most of the information regarding the academics and programs. If you're looking at the PDF version, meaning the electronic version on site or on the internet, that might be pages 15 through 63. Also, I want to recap the budget schedule that's coming after this, just so we understand where we are. Next week, in about 1 week, on April 21st, we will be going into a public hearing. We will hear from the community and stakeholders around our budget. On April 27th, which is a couple of weeks from now, we will be sitting with City Council to go over this particular budget. On April 28th, the following day, we'll present our second round of deliberations. And 3 weeks from now, on May 5th, will be the budget vote, based on the information. Now, I said I wanted to level set, and I had quite a few questions, influx of questions that have come through, so I also want to address those up front. And so that is, there was a memo that you all received this past Sunday on April 12th. That particular memo from myself is actually the March 31st memo. The updated date to April 12th was to reflect some revisions or some additions that had been added, which is where we'll be focusing on the budget, if that makes sense. So that original memo with the timelines that came out on Sunday was the original communication from March 31st, and I wanted to make sure that was clarified, because in that particular memo, it speaks to the first round of questions to the Board of Education being on April 6th, which we recognize. The questions I received today were that, hey, we didn't get a budget book until April 7th. I also want to bring to the attention of the board that on March 26th, we unanimously, if I'm not mistaken, voted to adjust the budget calendar to accept the book on the 7th. So there's a few things that I want to look at, but finally, what I'd like to acknowledge is that the majority of us received this particular budget book on yesterday. I know that I got my book on yesterday, as did most of you. And so that's going to lead us to a space where the questions, we may have some questions that was supposed to be delivered to us on April 10th. My understanding is there may have been some delivery issues that happened, so we did not get them on the 10th, but we did receive them on yesterday. So here we are. What is this format going to look like before I turn it over to the superintendent? This format this evening for us, we in the original communication spoke to a round robin format. I don't know if that's necessarily going to be most effective based on where we are and the information that we're trying to work through. With that said, we will do a round robin approach, but that approach is going to look a little different. Instead of one question for a commissioner, what will happen is a commissioner, once called on, will be able to present their question. If administration is able to provide a response to that question, that commissioner then may have a follow-up question, which I totally understand. Then we'll move on to another commissioner, and we'll do a few rounds of that to ensure that we all can kind of work through our questions and that we walk away with some understanding. I do see one hand that I want to acknowledge, and then I will be turning the mic over to the superintendent. Commissioner Santiago?
Yeah, very quickly, I just want to, talk about the calendar because that was brought up today. But I noticed inside of the calendar, we do only have two budget deliberations before we're expected to vote. I know in the past we had more than two, and I know that we also have a deadline. I just want to say, with all of the complications with this budget, also where we are with the state budget and that not being passed, and possibly it not being passed before our next deliberation, I think that it's important that we have more than two deliberations, as we have a $1 billion budget. And two deliberations where we can only ask two questions each is definitely not enough time for us to make sure that we're doing our due diligence as board members, to make sure that we're asking questions both for the public and to ensure that we're being fiscally and financially smart and academically smart within our budget. So I know that the calendar is already created, but I do believe that we need more deliberation sessions than just the two that's currently available. And I just want to put that out there. I hope that my colleagues support that, but it's certainly not enough time for us to get through this entire complicated process. And this year is different compared to other years, seeing that we don't have a state budget that's passed, and we probably won't within this week or possibly next week also. And so that does take more time for us to discuss and more drafts of this budget. And I don't know if two deliberations is enough for that.
Thank you. And so you beat me to the punch, sir. But after we got through this evening, I wanted to talk about the need for additional conversation around what it looks like and what's going to be a constructive timeline, acknowledging that the budget governor's run has not come out yet. And just for clarification, I'm not allowing just two questions per commissioner. We may get to several more. Just in case anyone else did not understand, we will be doing a round-robin approach. For clarity, commissioners will ask a question, they will be able to ask a follow-up question, but then I want to allow another commissioner to get their stuff in before we make our way back to you, so that we're not having dominating conversations, if that makes sense. And we can get that clarity as we go along, but I'm ready to jump right in and have this conversation. As we do this, I'm going to allow Superintendent Rosser to present some information for us, and then we'll continue from there.
So thank you very much, Board President. Thank you very much, Commissioners, for being here tonight. Thank you very much to our community who is logged in to really get an understanding as to where we're currently at in the development of this preliminary budget. And I define preliminary as being this budget that we're having conversations about this evening does not take into consideration all of the revenue streams that are going to be coming to the Rochester City School District. We are waiting, to Commissioner Santiago's point, we're waiting to hear critical information on the state enacted budget, as Commissioner Santiago spoke to. We're not anticipating that that information will be available to school districts across the state until sometime closer to May 1st, is what we've been told. So tonight's conversation, of course, will most certainly be focused on our preliminary budget. And as I indicated earlier, it does not reflect fully what our entire final budget will look like. Tonight, as we begin our first budget deliberation for the 26-27 school year, I want to ground us in our shared objective, which is activating the dreams and unlocking the potential of every Rochester City School District student, while strategically navigating the realities that we face, be that declining enrollment, rising expenditures, or decreasing revenue streams. Our charge, as outlined in our mission, is clear: to cultivate a culture of academic excellence for all, alongside a community ingrained in empathy, equity, and accountability. One that empowers every student to succeed in school and beyond. So over the past 9 months, I've taken a comprehensive look at the organization, its structure, its systems, and our current capacity to meet our goals. It is evident that the challenges we face, unfortunately, many are deeply rooted, will require a sustained and focused approach an effort over time to fully address. However, I am 3,000% confident that through our district-wide transformation efforts, we will drive meaningful improvements in student outcomes, leading to higher graduation rates and expanding the opportunities for all students upon graduation from the Rochester City School District. This evening's presentation is intended to help frame the proposed budget in the way that is clearer, more transparent, and more useful as the board begins its review. It also reflects a different approach from what has been presented in the past. This year's budget book has been restructured and reformatted in response to feedback from our families, commissioners, staff, and partners in education. It includes a budget for each department, which was not a part of prior budget books. This is extremely important because one of our goals in this process has been to make sure that not only the board, but also the community have more of a complete and understandable picture of how the resources are being allocated across the district. I want to note that this preliminary budget remains preliminary. We're still waiting final action of the New York State budget. And until that process is complete, there are important pieces of our financial picture that remain unsettled. As a result, the budget before you tonight reflects the best information available to us at this time. As we have continued to articulate, we will carefully review any changes in state aid once the budget is enacted and determine where adjustments or restorations are possible. I need to publicly say this and acknowledge this up front. This budget has been very difficult to put together. There's a lot that is in this budget that I don't agree with, but is based upon the governor's run at this point in time. And there's a lot of things that myself and the team have had to address that has not been addressed in past budgets. There are several budget uncertainties that remain that will ultimately shape the final financial plan. At this time, the preliminary budget does not reflect current federal and state revenue streams, including state aid, what our title allocations will be, where our IDA allocations will be, and grant funds that we have made application to. That said, there is also encouraging news. Last week, we received confirmation of a nearly $1 million in philanthropic support. And just yesterday evening, we were notified of a $3.5 million increase in school improvement funds. These additional resources are not yet reflected in the budget book that we have published. It is still important to articulate that there are real financial pressures on the district, and those pressures have required difficult decisions. Some of those decisions are reflected in staffing changes and reductions in areas that we know matter deeply to people across this organization, including central office, administration, social work, counseling, and teachers on assignment, among others. I know that these decisions are difficult, and some of them are not popular and are being met with concern, frustration, and opposition. I understand that. Those reactions come from people who deeply care about our students and about the services they as individuals provide. Nothing about this should be dismissed. I want to say very clearly, I do not take those decisions lightly. I also want to be honest that I don't necessarily like them either. No superintendent wants to present a budget that includes reductions affecting staff who care deeply about our children and who show up day in and day out to service the school district. And at the same time, part of my responsibility is to present a budget that is grounded in our fiscal reality. That means being clear about what we can sustain, realistic about the constraints we are operating under, and disciplined in how we align our resources. This does not make the impact of decisions easier, though it does make the rationale clear. One of the more significant shifts reflected in this budget is the district's use of an equity-based staffing allocation model that ties school staffing more directly to student enrollment. And as I mentioned earlier, we have declining enrollment here in Rochester. This shift has led to increases in pupil allocations, staffing for special education, community schools expansion, and restructuring the Office of School Culture and Climate. We all know the importance of mental health and the safety of our students, and they remain top priorities. This preliminary budget also includes the opening of 2 pre-kindergarten centers, strengthening our early childhood continuum, and expanding access to our youngest learners, not only benefiting our youngest learners, but benefiting their families as well, who are strapped, unfortunately, with high child care costs. This budget also includes 2 new parent centers, which represent an important investment in the district, making more of an effort to engage and support our families. We are experiencing an increase in the need for more intensive supports for our students with exceptionalities. Rising service demands and compliance obligations have shifted service provisions and staffing for all students. One effect of that change is the increase in contractual costs at each of the buildings for special education paraprofessionals to support service delivery for each of these students. This budget reflects continued investments and priorities central to our strategic plan and the needs we have heard from our community. So as the community reviews the budget, I ask that it be understood in full context, that when people are having conversations about our preliminary budget, that they're not having conversations about one specific element of our budget, but the complete pie. This budget is shaped by constraints, yet it is also a budget shaped by priorities. It reflects difficult choices, though it also reflects deliberate investments. It responds to physical pressure, financial pressures, while also continuing to implement the strategic plan in meaningful ways. Tonight's deliberation will focus primarily on school profiles and programs, with teaching and learning at the center of the conversation. The intent is to begin at the school and program level so that the board can see more clearly how staffing, programming, and resources are reflected in the preliminary budget and how those decisions connect to a broader direction of the district. My hope tonight is that this presentation helps to frame the conversation in a way that is honest, thoughtful, and productive. We're not presenting a final budget. We're not presenting a perfect preliminary budget. We're presenting a serious budget, one that reflects the very real challenges we face and the real responsibilities we have to steward public resources carefully while continuing to center every decision and every action around the success of our students. At this time, I will have Chief McDowell share the financials associated with this preliminary budget and the final five-year forecast.
Thank you, Superintendent Rosser. So we'll start with the revenue projections, and they're the same projections that we had, that we gave the board on the 7th of this month. Our total budget is $1,326,696. Most of that is coming from state aid, which comprises about $827 million. Monies from the city of Rochester, $119 million approximately. Local share, which comprises rebates and interest, of about $28.5 million. We have $4.5 million coming from the federal government and federal means, and then appropriated fund balance in the range of $23.9 million. When we look at our expenditures are categorized in six different areas. No general support, which is mostly all of us, comprises about $87.5 million, $87.6 million of our overall budget. What we do here, which is instruction, comprises $513 million approximately. Transportation, we estimate that to be about $91.8 million. Community support of about $800,000. Benefits of $207 million. And then your debt service of approximately $101.6 million. Total increase, budget to budget, 3.88%, or about $37.4 million. Lastly, the superintendent mentioned your five-year forecast, and as you can see here, in the year 2027, our gap is approximately $23.8 million, and as Commissioner Santiago said, these numbers will probably change. And we will be back to the board to update those when we get the state numbers. But when you look at your next 4 years, this is where the rubber really will hit the road, because you're talking about a $60 million or $61 million deficit or gap in 2028. That inflates to $84.6 million in 2029, all the way out to approximately $128.8 million if things stayed as we forecasted today. I can tell you this, with the help of our executive budget director here, Mike Mahaney, this is where we're really focusing a lot of our work and attention. There's no way that this district or any district can sustain a $400 million gap in a 5-year period. It just can't happen. So what we're going to really focus on are the main cost centers that are causing us to elevate, which are our cost of charter schools, our cost for health insurance, transportation, and then staffing. And that work will continue every day until we get these numbers in a more palatable position.
Thank you very much, Chief McDowell. In closing, our final budget must balance our fiscal responsibility with the district's commitment to high-quality instruction, student well-being, family engagement, operational efficiency, and lastly, long-term sustainability. Before we begin our deliberations, I will have Chief Ramos Lopez review the new format of our budget book. Chief Lopez.
Thank you, Dr. Rosser. Good evening, commissioners. This year, our budget book is structured differently. In the past, we've had a number of conversations regarding the formatting of the budget book, and we are presenting you with a new format that provides additional narrative sections where the community will have a better understanding of an executive summary, the sections in the book, and understand that we have moved the most important focus for this district to the front of the book, and that is students and programs. So anything that is forward-facing with students is what is being discussed this evening. We also provide information on programs. The financial structure section provides information on the general fund, special aid, and food services, and we've also included a section on department budgets. I'll turn it over now to Dr. Rosser.
Thank you very much, Chief Lopez. Board President, this concludes my opening statements to our budget deliberation conversations this evening.
Thank you, Dr. Rosser. Can everyone hear me okay? All right, we're going to open up and begin our conversation. I'd like to present one question myself before turning it over to my fellow colleagues. And that is, we recognize through this process, we've talked a lot about the unideal situation we're in regarding the governor's run is delayed, IDEA, and the title funds, and all of those things. Those allocations have not yet been identified. And so it makes it very difficult to have a concrete positioning. My understanding, and you guys can help guide me, is that sometimes, though, these dollars come in and you can project what the dollars may look like. And so I'm wondering if administration on any level has formatted some form of contingency, meaning if the dollars come in as expected, this is what we can expect. If the dollars come in lower than we expect, this is what you will see. And if they surprisingly come in higher, you will then see this. Because when we're talking about positions and programs that you acknowledge are concerning to a lot our community as well as us, we would love to have a better understanding of where we're going, because the unknowns are making us a little uncomfortable. Can you or someone expound on that?
Yeah, I can most certainly, and that's a great question. So the team and I have been working daily on making internal adjustments to our budget, thinking about things differently, because in order for Rochester to see the success that we all know is possible here in Rochester, it requires us to think about things differently in a disciplined way. So yes, we have identified areas that we would make restorations to. We have identified areas in which we would make adjustments to based upon some projections. And once we receive additional information, we most certainly will then be able to enact what we have placed as Plan A, Plan B, and Plan C for the community to consume.
Okay, because that was going to be my follow-up question. So this, once you have this, I guess my follow-up will be timeline on those pieces, because we can't dictate when the governor's budget's going to
Right.
come in. We have a wish, but we can't dictate that. But we can determine when we might have a timeline for these contingencies. And so
Yeah.
what might that look like? When
Yeah,
we
so
see that?
for instance, as I mentioned yesterday evening around 5:30, we received great news from Albany, the New York State Education Department, that where we thought that we were going to receive about $8 million in school improvement aid, we're actually going to receive 11.5. Given the fact that we just received the information last evening, I will share with you that members of the team have already begun looking at ways in which those dollars can be utilized to further advance student success in the school district. We also, as I mentioned, received notice late last week or mid last week around philanthropic support for our community schools initiative, and we've already begun the conversations as to how those dollars will look as it relates to supporting the success of our students in our school district. We're waiting at this point in time, and we've received some verbal confirmation about a refugee grant of about $1 million, and we're beginning the planning around how might we be able to support more of our new American students, particularly over at the RIA program. We received word as a part of the communication yesterday from the New York State Department of Education that our receivership schools will receive $200,000 apiece, which is a total of $1.4 million. And we've begun to enact a Plan A that we had in anticipation of receiving these funds. We have also are making application to a school violence prevention grant, which will help further strengthen our safety and security posture. And we're making plans around once those dollars, and I'm speaking it into existence, once those dollars become available, how we will then advance student success in our school district.
That's very exciting. And what is the timeline on that? Because I know you won't have all of it spelled out.
It's happening weekly.
Okay.
As I mentioned, we are meeting daily to discuss the budget and having conversations around next steps in developing and presenting a final budget to the board. So my plan, of course, during our next business meeting, during my superintendent's report, is to provide more updates as to where we're at in our planning for the budget, as I've done each month related to our budgeting process.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to start with a show of hands. I do see Vice President Malloy, who, again, she'll present a question. She may have a follow-up, but go ahead with your first question.
Thank you. And I realize just earlier you did answer some questions for me. And I think given what you just said about these potential additional revenue streams that are coming through, this is a bit redundant because of that, but how are we ensuring continuation of social emotional supports for our highest needs schools, especially our receivership schools, or those schools that have the highest number of English language learners or students with exceptionalities? What are we doing with this budget to ensure that those continuation of services?
That's a great question. What I'm going to start with is really speaking to this preliminary budget, making additional investments in our students with exceptionalities along with our English language learners. In the budget book, we articulate how important it is for these populations to receive additional support, financial support at the building level. And for our listening community on page 11, we note that we are increasing the per pupil allocation, which we call taboo, total allocation per pupil, which will give each of our schools additional funding to be able to support the needs of our children. All students, we are increasing that amount from $150 this year to $160. For students with exceptionalities, this current year, it's an additional $40. In our proposed preliminary budget, we're looking to increase that to $60, so $20 in addition to that. And our L students, understanding that when we look at our graduation rates, both students with exceptionalities and Ls really struggle when it comes to graduation. We want to make sure that at all levels, just not at the high school level, at all levels, that there is additional funding. And for our L students, we're increasing the funding per pupil from $30 this year to $60. As it relates to social emotional, which is, as I mentioned earlier, things about the budget, preliminary budget that I'm not happy about. However, given our financial constraints and making sure that we're protecting what happens inside the classroom first, and making sure that the supports to develop the capacity of our educators is in place, we were forced to look at several different areas Social workers were one of them. School counselors were another. We were able to maintain, thank God, our music teacher and our art teachers, because they too are normally the ones that go in any school district's budget, but we have been able to protect those two areas. We are looking at the provision of student supports through our district. We have been in a very good place as an institution to be supported by a number of community-based organizations. And in some instances, we have community-based organizations who have many, and when I say many, there's one in school in particular that has 5 social emotional workers in the building that accompany what we provide by way of social workers and school counselors. One of the things in my 9 months that I've been able to realize is that much of what's being provided around SEL, and I mentioned this during my report on my recommendations for the Mental Health Ad Hoc Committee, that there's a lot of room for growth for us to better ensure that the provisions of SEL supports are not siloed in our district, as they are in many instances across all schools, and that there is better coordinated supports that are provided to our children. So, as a part of the work, particularly around the Mental Health Ad Hoc Committee recommendations that we will be implementing, is going to be that work of developing a system of coordinated supports so that the financial resources that we expend on SEL are better managed by our school district in supporting our children.
Thank you, Dr. Rosser.
Commissioner Santiago.
Thank you. I know today we're only focused on schools and programs, and so I'm gonna try to stay in those subjects and under those focuses. I've noticed that at East and Lower East, there's cuts to their budget. Of course, Lower East is still in receivership. East has recently gotten out of receivership. And so, of course, as we're trying to keep them out of receivership and get East Lower out of receivership also, I'm not sure how the budget cuts will be in support of doing that. And so I just have a question as far as what's the plans with our receivership schools that are also getting a cut, because it's not just East. We also have Edison that's getting cuts in their budget, which is also a school in receivership. And a couple other schools who are getting cuts. And so my question is, what's the plan, and how will we push to get these schools out of receivership with less resources?
That's a great question, and I'm glad that you brought it up, because one of the things that is not clear, and we need to figure out as a district, how do we make things a little bit more clear in our budget conversations. But as I mentioned earlier, the budget book does not reflect all of our revenues. So when we're making a comparison between the adopted budget from last year and what is currently in our preliminary budget, it's going to be a difference naturally, because all of our revenues have not yet been identified. So for instance, as I mentioned earlier, we're anticipating $1.4 million for receivership schools. That $1.4 million is not reflected in any of the numbers that are speaking to our receivership schools. Once we receive confirmation that those dollars will be made available at that point in time, we can then make those adjustments. In addition to that, there are additional dollars, as I had shared earlier, the budget unknowns with title allocations in general, the IDA allocations, And even though we have heard from the federal government, well, we didn't hear from the federal government, we heard from the Council of Great City Schools and others, that those dollars that the federal government will appropriate to the state of New York will remain unchanged. What we don't yet know is how the state of New York, more specifically, the New York State Department of Education, how they will then allocate those dollars to school districts, because it's based upon need and it's also based upon enrollment. And we're still awaiting to hear what those allocations are so that we can then make the necessary adjustments to this preliminary budget.
Thank you.
As,
Oh, sorry.
yeah, as it relates to East EPO, upper and lower, the board made a commitment, and that commitment was to fully fund East upper and lower at the rate this year that it had in previous years, and that commitment would expire this year. So the differences that we see in the East EPO is based upon us making a reduction, and I stress the word reduction, because while we have not fully funded it to the level that it was in past years, due to equity concerns, due to needs in other school buildings here in the Rochester City School District being equal to, if not higher, what we've decided to do was to spread some of the monies that were used solely for East EPO and apply them to another school in which we're working with the RTA, or will be working with the RTA, as well as the membership of this particular building to make sure that they have opportunities to grow their program and to support student success. So that's the reason why there's a difference between what was adopted this current year and what is proposed for next year.
And so also a quick follow-up. So for Andrew Langston Middle School, we see a $5 million increase. And just about that entire increase is towards compensation. I do know that there's a 74% increase in enrollment as far as that school, because, you know, one school will be ending, a new school will be taking over the building. But for $5 million in compensations, what's the amount of FTEs that we're adding to the school or taking away? And I know it's a little complicated because it's split into two schools right now. But $5 million increase, while we look at other schools who are in receivership and struggling get a decrease, is interesting. And for most of that to be in compensation is also interesting
Yeah.
too. Yep.
On page 121, it shows a breakdown of all the positions. And for Andrew Langston, which is at the bottom of the page, we see an increase of 63.1 FTEs. So therefore, that then represents the compensation associated with the total number of staff members who will be in that building, which currently is at 98.8. And that's to your point, because we are merging Northwest, we shouldn't say we're merging Northwest, we're closing Northwest, and the current seventh graders who are currently seventh graders at Northwest will be eighth graders at Langston. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Dr. Orden, we're also projecting a slight increase of the number of students who have the availability to attend Langston for next year.
Thank you, Commissioner Santiago. Commissioner Griffin?
Yes, yes, thank you. You talked about the opening of 2 pre-K schools for 39 and 44. I have a concern about it, but I just want to ask you a basic question about it. We currently don't have a problem or any issues with our pre-K, program. We do, however, have an increased SPED population. A lot of our CBOs, which are the community-based organizations, would be affected by the opening of 39 school in 44. Also, we're supposed to be doing more with less. Why are we addressing this at this time when it's not even a board goal? Why do this now when we have other areas that we could be addressing instead of opening up a pre-K school or two of them, and possibly could be affecting the increase of SPED, because we know we have a lack of teachers too as well. So we have a number of issues when trying to open these schools, as well as an economical issue. Also, with that being said, I think it would be a negative effect on the community, because a lot of people would lose jobs in our community-based organizations if this was to happen. I think the money should be not put into opening up an additional pre-K program in 2 different schools, but yet it should be put into our athletics and our CTE departments, which are lacking in a lot of our schools. And that would bring in the increase of students coming back to the district, as we are lacking in those areas. What is your perception on that?
I appreciate the question, and this is something that, your question is something that many of our community members do wonder about. So you're spot on with, asking the question, why is the district making greater investments in pre-K than it is in other areas? So I will share with you, the answer is multifaceted. The first thing that is providing us, the first variable that is providing us with the ability to create a greater number of seats for our 3 and 4-year-olds is the fact that the governor, in her executive budget, has actually increased the amount of money for pre-K, exclusively for pre-K, in her budget. That amount is approximately $8 million, and we as a school district don't have the ability to take that $8 million and then reappropriate it for CTE or athletics. It is currently earmarked for pre-kindergarten. There's a movement across the state in which I support 3,000%. And the movement really speaks to school districts having an opportunity to work with our community's youngest learners, beginning at the age of 3 and 4 years of age. And the reason why this movement is gaining a lot of traction is because there's a lot of research that is out there that speaks to when students are engaged in pre-K programming, be a 3-year-old, be a 4-year-old, and it's the same research that is based on the Head Start program, that the levels of success are so much greater for those students while they're in school and most certainly beyond school. So that movement is really being facilitated or fueled with the research that indicates, I don't even want to say suggests because it's already been founded, indicates that when school districts, CBOs included, are working with their children at the early age of 3 years of age or 4 years of age, that they have greater success while they're in school and most certainly upon graduation. To your point, and I know that there may be a number of CBOs who are fearful that what we're doing as a school district will impact their enrollment. I will say for the record that there are enough 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds in our community who are currently not connected to a pre-K program. Our intentions is not to target any of the CBO's enrollment, but to tap into, through our recruitment efforts, those populations of students, 3 and 4-year-olds, future students, I should say, 3 and 4-year-olds, who are currently not connected to an educational program, be it in the CBO or be it in the Rochester City School District. The other piece to that, which is of great benefit to our families and also to our community, by having more access to 3 and 4-year-old pre-K programs, it alleviates our parents from having to invest in child care at the rate of approximately $12,000. And for many of our parents, $12,000 is a lot of money. But if they can send their children to the 3-year-old pre-K program or the 4-year-old pre-K program, it alleviates that financial burden on our families. And they can use those dollars to then support things happening in our community, which ultimately strengthens our community, because that's less money that is being utilized for parents to have to pay out for childcare.
Okay, I just wanted to just say one thing about what you were saying. My concern, and I appreciate your response, but my major concern is the people, the leaders that are in front of our children, giving them a sound education to be successful at that age. We have a lot of CBOs that are very hands-on. They're very patient, not saying that the teachers are not, but I do see that there's a stark difference between some of the kids coming out of CBOs and coming out of the city school district. And a lot of our children from the CBOs have a very positive outcome, and there's some that, a lot of them have a positive outcome out of the district. But I'm seeing a stark difference in the way they are being taught in the CBOs versus in our district, and that is very concerning to me. So we know our district is an urban dynamic, so we have a lot of CBOs that are of cultural differences, you know. So we need to look at that as a possibility of bringing in a more diverse group of teachers, so that we can address these concerns that a lot of the public has. So maybe that then it would ease people's minds per se. I think that is the big concern. So how are we going to do that is what the issue and the concern is in the community. Thank you.
Thank you. I do see a hand from Commissioner LeBron. And just before Commissioner LeBron does speak, you guys might have to get my attention, because Dr. Ross he ain't a small gentleman. So, you know, put your hand out, you tap me. I promise I'm not trying to overlook anyone. Commissioner LeBron?
Thank you. And I apologize, I was downstairs on a call, but I didn't realize we weren't doing round robin for the budget deliberations.
We are.
Okay.
Let me give you a level set really, really quickly. We're
Yeah.
going to do round robin. So you ask a question. First of all, we're not going to limit it to 2 questions each because of the timing in which the budget books came, all that good stuff. Ask a question. You may have a follow-up. Then we'll go to someone else, but we'll make our way back.
Thank you for that clarity. My question is going to be related to the home hospital instruction and the cuts there. Obviously, we already started getting some advocacy emails around that, but the first email I got, you know, full transparency, forwarded to the super just to clarify, but I do want to clarify on record what the plan is. I also want to point out that I have lived through cuts in this district with other superintendents trying to make very big changes. This is not the first time home hospital instruction has come up as a cut. I'm sure it won't be the last. I will remind folks, we also went through big cuts and transformative changes under a previous superintendent in SPED, which did nothing but further worsen our outcomes. And so with that said, I want to be clear that I will not vote for any major changes to programs or services that do not have a transitional plan that makes sense, not only to us as board members, but really to the parents and the families. I also want to uplift that even if there is an external potential partner, that home hospice instruction is not really a one-size-fits-all either, and that there's a wide range of needs and students. And so again, I just want to put that out there, because for myself, again, having lived experience right here on this board or right here on this floor, with many different superintendents who have come with great grand ideas, I get it. But the issue is that it is such a stark transition to do that we don't ever do them well because they're so large that we try to do them right away. And then what ends up happening is we end up crawling sort of back to where we were before because we're like, oh, that didn't work. And so I just believe that transition should happen. I'm not advocating that it doesn't, but I certainly think that it has to be very transparent, clear, that we all have an understanding, again, families, our staff, what that looks like, and that it's not a one-size-fits-all, and certainly not an outside. That makes me a little nervous just knowing our community, because you're also going inside the home. And so being mindful that Zoom options might be great for some of these students who need home instruction, but that will not be the reality for others. So all of those factors. That is actually the only area for me, because this would be a make or break deal for me, would be this area. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner LeBron. Response?
Yeah, so let me just make it clear for the record that for home hospital, this is one of those areas, as I mentioned earlier, that, we are looking at ways in which we can make some restorations. In fact, I will share with you today that based upon some efficiencies that we've identified in other areas, we have made some restorations already that's not reflected in the budget book. Let me provide some realities. Well, let me say this also, that there will be a transition plan, and that transition plan will not include any external partners, and it will not rely 100% on remote learning. That's number one. The transition plan will be thoroughly researched. It would be based upon models that we currently have here in New York State. I will share with the community, as I share it with certain commissioners, that in my role as an associate superintendent in Buffalo, I have the responsibility for such program. And I will share with you, with having conversations with other former superintendents and current superintendents, that there are models that are acceptable throughout New York State. Our model here in Rochester is quite expensive, very expensive. We currently have 33 teachers who are assigned to home hospital. And there's been some changes that have happened over the past couple years that, due to transitioning of superintendents and staff members, the appropriate adjustments to the home hospital program did not take place. So for instance, it is my understanding that the Rochester City School District provided instruction to any student that was in the hospital. That would be students from neighboring school districts, students who, based upon the specialty of the doctor, may come from Buffalo and are being are in the hospital. They need instruction. Within the past 2 years, the reliance on the Rochester City School District to provide that instruction has ended. So therefore, other school districts are receiving instruction from someone else other than Rochester. And we did not make any staffing adjustments when that took place. So let me provide some real numbers as it relates to the number of students that we currently provide services to. For the month of September, 41 students, 32 teachers, which means some teachers may not have had a caseload, or some teachers had a very small caseload. October, the numbers kind of went up, as we expect, because kids are enrolling. You know, doctors are getting scripts and everything saying that little Eric J needs to be on home instruction. 60 students. November, 58 students. December, 53 students. January, 48 students. February, projected 40 students. March, 39 students. So as we look at the powerhouse of our teachers only having one student that they're either instructing 2 hours a day or 3 hours a day, we are not utilizing our financial resources in the most prudent way. So this requires, of course, for us to really dive deeper into what's happening with our home hospital program, and it may require us to make some shifts. And as I mentioned, if those shifts are to come, there will be a very solid and comprehensive transition plan. And the impacted individuals won't be laid off because they're certificated teachers. And we have a lot of classrooms right now that have uncertificated teachers. And our goal, of course, is making sure that our children receive the highest level of instruction. We want to make sure that our classrooms have more certificated teachers who have been educated and trained to provide high-quality instruction. I'll end with this. There's more work that needs to be done around this, given the fact that as a state monitor district, we were required to present a balanced budget. This was a space where I could quickly identify individuals who can then be placed back into the classroom. But we recognize that there's still a lot more research and things that we need to do before we put forward a recommendation that the entire group of 32 teachers are cut in our final budget.
Yes.
But that has to happen before the budget passes. Like, if you want to vote out of me, that plan has to be out here and understood fully before a budget vote, because I do not vote on future plans or concepts of plans. Not to put concepts of plans on you, Superintendent, let me be clear. But I'm just saying, for me, again, previous superintendents, I cannot vote on something that does not exist. And it has happened, unfortunately, in the past. You know, colleagues have to vote their own conscious of what they're, you know, everyone's going to have sort of their own hill that they're going to stick to. But this would be, in my professional opinion, actually, not only detrimental, but would cause like unnecessary ripple drama down the line that we could literally prevent right now with ensuring. So I just want to put on the record that for myself, in order to vote, that plan would need to be presented, clearly understood, and all parties having an understanding. Thank you.
Point taken, and plan will be, if we do move in this direction, a plan will be presented to the board.
And just to level set also, there was at the top of this, a question presented around contingency, meaning we know we're waiting on the budget governor's run in dollars that are not available to us right now, but also just what are the contingencies, what do we expect to see? So I'm glad there's a plan for that. Without continuing, I want to go to Commissioner Feynman at this time.
I want to echo what Commissioner LeBron says. I have asked on the diocese before, that's an income program also. While we don't see kids in the hospital, we do see them in the new partial program that is expanding. We do teach in that program, and this is an income-generating program because of that. And this is not just kids who are in the hospital. These are kids who just cannot handle being in the classroom. And again, it would be huge impact on our communities to not have the ability to have this kind of program. And I want to echo those statements.
Thank you, Commissioner Feynman, and I do want to go on record and correct myself, not governor's run, but the legislative enacted budget is what I should have referenced. Thank you for that correction. But I'm going to go to Commissioner McCullough to present his question and follow up as well.
All right. So I just want to really quick, I do want to reiterate what President Simmons says and Commissioner Santiago about the deliberations and having more time. We just really wasn't given a lot of time to look over these by the time we got these books and the updated versions of them. So that would be something that needs to be considered so that we can actually give our full efforts into what we're doing. But my question is more centered around allocations, specifically when it comes to the special education increases in the middle schools. What I noticed is of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 middle schools, and not really including East Lower because we know that's a special thing happened at East Lower, but out of like Thurgood, Andrew Langston, Loretta, and Freddie Thomas, the change rate in the amount of special education students that were being allocated to those schools for the new year doesn't quite match up with the amount of increase that the schools are getting. And let me give you an example. Freddie Thomas has a 8.33% increase in special education students, but out of all the schools, will be getting the least amount of money for the change at 4.91%. So I'm asking, how are these allocations being determined, and what's the methodology behind it?
That's a good question. So just using Freddie Thomas as an example. So right now, the projected numbers were 109 students per last year, or this current year's budget. Those are the projected numbers. Those numbers may be higher than 109 right now, but what we're projecting for next year is 141. So the question really revolves around where is the increase allocation per student found? If you look at the contractual lines, as well as the supply lines, each of the building principals were given an opportunity to take their per pupil allocation and then sort of allocate it in areas in which they felt is most needed. The difference in our allocation this current year of $50 per additional for each student with an exceptionality to, $40 to $60 would then be reflected in the operational budgets for the school.
Did you have a follow-up at all, Commissioner McCullough?
So with those allocations, if you're leaving up to the principals, how exactly does that ensure, as far as the administration is concerned, how does that ensure that our highest need students are actually getting the services they need based on these allocations and how the principals are doing it?
My apologies, my attention was drawn somewhere else when you
That's
first.
okay.
That's okay.
That's all right.
Can you repeat Can you repeat the first part of your question?
Yeah, so if the principals are the ones determining how these funds are going to be allocated and based off of the money and their contractual, what you said, contractual, I believe it was, how are the administration ensuring that the most vulnerable students and the high need students are getting the services needed based on the funds that are being given to the schools?
So that's a great question. We have a very, I'm going to call it rich support system when it comes to students with exceptionalities here in Rochester. And I say rich because when I look at other school districts, particularly the Big Five, the amount of special education supports, they don't mirror what we have here in Rochester. And some of that, of course, is due to us being under a consent decree and making sure that, the interest and success of the students are being addressed in a legally and meaningful manner. So in each of our buildings, we have associate directors who are part of special education, and their responsibility is to make sure that teachers are supported, IEPs are being implemented, and I'm not suggesting that it's done perfectly across the board, but that's part of our continuous improvement work to make sure that the capacity of all of our staff members, just not our teachers, but also administrators, is being built in such a way to then be more supportive to the needs of schools. So as it relates to the building administration has responsibility of making sure that all students, just not general education students, but students with exceptionalities, SIFE students, L students, any student that has what they consider to be a subgroup demographic are supported. There are other individuals in the schools as well, from instructional coaches who are there to support the capacity of our classroom teachers and other educators, to interventionists, those who are there to support the development and growth of our children, to reading specialists who are more specifically focused on literacy acquisition, to even central office staff members having the responsibility of supporting the needs of students.
Thank you. Before I move on to questions, because I do want to make sure that each commissioner has had an opportunity to at least present their first or initial question, I want to check in with Commissioner Feynman. Do you have a question at this particular time? It's okay if you don't. If you have one later, just let me know.
Commissioner LeBron brought forth my biggest
you wanted.
concern.
Okay. So we'll continue the conversation. I'm going to go into, I see a show of hands already happening. I'm going to hit with a question that I have, and then I see your hand, Commissioner Santiago. And that is, you mentioned something really important, which is when we spoke about the home hospital piece, and so I'm definitely interested to see how that does span out. And you mentioned, that if reductions were to happen, that it's not so much a staffing reduction, because we need certificated teachers in classrooms as well. And that has been a conversation that's been ongoing for a while now around certificated teachers and returning to classrooms, which brings me to the TOAs, teachers on assignment, for those listening. And in past years, there's been always conversation around teachers on assignment, and that we have an overload of them potentially, or that there's a need or desire to return teachers to classrooms, and we see different iterations of that. I'd love for administration to provide clarity on the number of teachers on assignment we currently have and the plan to actually return them to the classroom, or are we going to see title changes? Are these actual returning to what are we going to see in regard to teachers on assignment?
So that's a great question. It's something that the team and I have been working on. In fact, it was something that has been talked about for years, not here locally, but also at the state level, the number of TOAs in Rochester. So at one point in time, there were over 600 TOAs that the Rochester City School District supported financially. That number, of course, has decreased over the years, but we have a number of TOAs that we have defined as a team as being non-essential. And what we mean by non-essential, those who are not providing direct support to either students or those who are not providing direct support to their colleagues in the way of being instructional coaches. So we have still a great deal of TOAs. TOAs are defined as being anyone that is certificated, that is outside the classroom. That would be instructional coaches, that would be interventionists, that will be behavioral specialists, that would be reading teachers, that would be CTE, work-based coordinators, that would be TOAs that are attached to different departments here centrally. And what we began to do and continue to do is to really look at the role of the TOA and better define it. So one of the things we're in the process of doing is making sure that it is clear where the TOAs are at. And what that simply means is if we have 127 instructional coaches, that our community understands that that's 127 TOAs, because people use the term TOA a little bit differently depending upon the context of the conversation. But I will share with you that of the non-essential TOAs that we identified this year, there are approximately 19 of them that were returning back to the classroom for this upcoming school year. We do already have, because the work of developing a budget should not start in the year in which you're operating, but it should start in looking at projections. We've already identified several TOAs positions that are central office based that will conclude at the end of this next calendar year. Some might ask, why would you keep them on board this year if you know you're going to discontinue their service for next year? We're making a lot of adjustments to the way in which central office looks, how it feels, and how it operates to support the needs of our schools. And in doing so, we recognize that we need to make sure that this upcoming year, particularly with these TOAs, that we develop the infrastructure so that when they're no longer here, that others who are not TOAs will then be able to carry forward with the work. And that not only applies to TOAs, but we've already identified next year certain central office positions that will cease to exist after this year. Understanding that we have projected at this juncture a $60 million deficit for the 27-28 school year, I'm happy to say that us addressing that has already started, and that we're not waiting until the budget development of the 27-28 school year.
Thank you for that response. And so my follow-up, for my clarity, it would be just the clarity around how many TOAs we have. I understand you identified 19 may return to the classroom, but how many do we currently have on record? And will there be any title changes?
Yeah, there's some title changes that are happening. Of course, we need to make sure that we're operating within the confinements of the collective bargaining units. The number of TOAs at this point in time, based upon our preliminary budget, we have close to 200 that still remain in the organization. That number, just to be clear and crystal clear, that number may increase based upon how we support, particularly our receivership schools, in getting out of receivership. I mentioned earlier that there's $1.4 million that is coming to the district for receivership schools. And those schools, building principals and those school-based planning teams will have the ability to simply say, hey, my reading scores aren't where I need them to be. I would like to use this $200,000 to get an interventionist and perhaps a reading teacher, which will then, of course, add to our current TOAs, because as defined, a TOA is someone who is a certified teacher who is not in the classroom providing direct instruction to our students.
Thank you, Dr. Rosser. Commissioner Santiago?
Yeah, I just want to cover this because it was mentioned inside of your presentation, and you also mentioned it a little bit outside of that. But around April of last year, the board, or May of last year, the board voted on a mental health ad hoc committee, which was passed by the entire board, or not by the majority of the board. Around December of last year, the Mental Health Ad Hoc Committee gave their recommendations to the board, and around February of this year, there were promises made, not just to the committee, but to the community, our students, our parents, and the entire board itself. Inside of this budget, we see cuts to social workers, to guidance counselors, to our Rock Restorative Hub, to the school climate department, and in many other areas where those positions were meant to support our children, both mentally but also academically, as they're figuring out their future and what they'll be doing in their life. And also with the hospital education program that Commissioner LeBron was speaking about, a lot of these cuts are cuts to our most vulnerable students. And it's, of course, something that I cannot support. And I know that we are currently in draft phase. There's a lot more development that will be happening. But I think that it's important that we have priorities, and part of the priorities have to be our students' well-being. Some of the biggest cuts that we see inside this budget are things that continue to support our young people, both through SEL, through mental health services, and also just somebody who can help our young people as they get through high school, as they get through middle school, as they get through our district. I also want to say that one of our board guardrails mentions on how we want to support and we want to ensure that we are moving away from the direction of harming our students' psychological or social psychological, whatever word you guys use, their needs. And so this is also in violation of one of our board guardrails, which is something that we did together. And so with that being said, I know that we're in draft phase, there's going to be continued conversations, but if there's not major change, and if there's not a major prioritization in our students' well-being and our students' mental health and social emotional needs, I cannot vote yes on this, both because of these deductions that we're seeing in areas that supports our young people, but also with the home hospital education program, with the large cuts there. These are things that are important for our students, our most vulnerable students, but also important for our district and our city, certainly as we're working with our young people, and we've seen mental health and social emotional issues with our young people, and they need support. And it's a district who both gets funding to support them, but also who has a responsibility to support them. And so with what we currently see with a cut in social workers and guidance counselors in our restorative center, which is helping our attendants many times, keeping young people inside the school climate, which is also pushing to keep our students inside the school, we can have the perfect academic plan, we can have the perfect academic team if our students aren't coming to school. If our students aren't coming to school 100%, or there's not supports inside of the school, we won't see change. And so as we're talking about the board goals and the board guardrails, there was a board guardrail that was put into our board priorities, specifically saying that we do not want to see cuts or stuff that's affecting our students' social emotional needs. And currently in this draft budget, that's there. And I'm hoping that between now, this draft version into the final budget, that our students' well-being is prioritized, because on top of that, part of the cuts is in our food services. Our young people and our students don't like the lunches. It's just a reality. They do not like the lunches, and it's needed and it's essential for their bodies as they're trying to learn, and their brains as they're trying to learn. And so as we cut more FTEs, you start to see more food being warmed up instead of cooked inside of the locations. You start seeing overworked food service people and Bente members, and it creates an issue altogether. And so the way that our students' well-being is not prioritized, and I know that there was a large gap in the budget, so there was hard decisions that had to be made. But my hopes is between the draft budget and the final budget that we can prioritize our young people's well-being and their needs definitely right now more than ever. And so my vote would be a no on the budget if in the finalized budget there's not a prioritization in these areas. I know that right now the FTEs are down, an increase in those FTEs. Our guidance counselors are so important for our students to know. One of our board goals is that every ninth grade students will have 5 credits It's the guidance counselors that's supporting our students in those areas to know where they are, where they need to be, and where they can go. And so these are my priorities. And currently, if this was the final budget and put in front for a vote, my vote would be no. I'm hoping that between this draft and the final budget, I can vote yes, because we're really prioritizing our young people's well-being, not just with our promises, but with the actions of this budget. Thank you.
And I can appreciate every word that you spoke, Commissioner Santiago. And just for our listening community, I would not expect our board to vote on this preliminary budget, as I would not vote on this preliminary budget. As I mentioned earlier, I have continued to articulate that this budget does not address the full needs of our school district. We are dependent on our state, we're dependent on our federal government for the great amount of money that we receive as a school district. What I continue to share with members of our community, and I encourage people, and I know that there's people going to come to our public hearing and people who are going to be speaking at our speakers forum, that most certainly come and articulate what you feel and what you uplift as being important to our children. But just don't stop there. Let's also mobilize ourselves to have greater conversations at the state level, support our local delegation who is fighting hard to get more financial resources to the city of Rochester, particularly the Rochester City School District. When people are making decisions at the federal level that does not prioritize public education, we need to fight there too. Because what we currently have in the governor's budget, which is a reflection of what is in this book, we all agree that there's not enough funding that will support the needs of our children. In the unlikely event that we don't receive enough money to make full restorations, we need to collaborate, communicate, and together agree on difficult decisions that we need to make in order to provide for the long-term sustainability of our organization, while at the same time investing in our children with the financial resources that we have to our avail in the meantime.
Thank you, Dr. Rosser. I'm going to move on this way. You were just, okay, did I get you? Commissioner Feynman?
Yes, but I got a question.
Gotcha, Commissioner Feynman.
So I would be remiss if I didn't point out that there are only 2 schools that we're talking about in elementary school that have an increase in both English language learners and special education, students with exceptionalities, and that's school number 7 and school number 50. And we see a great increase in funding to school number 7 and a decrease to school 50, while we're increasing their English language learners 3% and their special education by a full percent, almost 0.75%. And yet there's a decrease in their budget. I just want to say that that shocks me, and I don't understand where that's coming from, especially having been in that building and 600 kids in that building. So no one else has a cut with an increase like that.
Can you give us the page again, Commissioner Feynman?
16 and 34.
16 and 34, okay.
So the increase, and you said English language learners, right?
Both.
So English language learners, from this year, we had 55. The increase is going to 57, so it's 2 additional students for School 7 projected for this year. Just want to make sure
Yep.
we're looking at the same book, because there's,
They're the only 2 schools that have an increase in both.
right. So when we look at our students with exceptionalities, They're basic at 133 at school 7 from this year to next year. That's what's being projected.
And yet they have a 13% increase in funding. And compared to School 50, who has an increase in English language learners, increase in special schools, children with special exceptionalities, and yet a decrease in funding on page 34.
Okay, that's something that we will most certainly look at. The one thing that will be hard to argue is the calculations, because everything is fed through a system that then calculates the dollar and appropriated amount. For School Without Walls, you had mentioned School Without Walls. I thought you said,
No, just those two schools.
oh, those, okay,
Just
okay.
for the elementary schools. I didn't get past that. Commissioner McCullough was addressing the middle schools. I just wanted to address that.
Yeah, the only thing that I can think about, because where there is a big difference is compensation, which means that if we had some highly compensated, meaning senior veteran staff members who are retiring or who are transitioning to another school, that would account for the small amount of decrease. Or if there was a staff member who was being reassigned based upon there no longer being a need at a particular grade level, that would then speak to the change of $78,000. And when it comes to the supplies from the adopted budget may have included grant funds that are not yet reflected in this preliminary budget, because, as I mentioned, we have $3.5 million that we still need to appropriate to schools. We have an additional $1.4 million for receivership schools that we still need to appropriate. So when we look at the adopted budget to this preliminary budget, which is very limited in not having all of the revenues appropriated, that may be the cause for the difference as well.
And I understand and I appreciate that, but when you have 35%, almost 40% of your English, of your population as English language learners, you need extra support, not less support.
Right.
And that's the only other elementary school that increases both, but also sees a decrease in
Yeah.
funding.
So let's take a look at this, of course, once we produce the final budget, because the team, myself, and others will have the ability to make the appropriation of any additional dollars we might receive as a part of state aid. We most certainly, will be able to provide additional funding through the $3.5 million that we were notified about yesterday. And then with the receivership dollar, even though 50 is not a receivership school, will most certainly be appropriated to the receivership schools.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Griffin?
Thank you, President Simmons. I just wanted to go back for a minute on the, we talked about the pre-K program. I was just reading some information that kind of threw me off based on the information you provided about the $8 million. It's stating here that hasn't actually been approved. The $8 million has been approved.
Right.
It has been approved?
Has not.
Has
It's a
not
part
been
of the
approved.
governor's run.
Okay, because what I'm actually seeing here is that money is actually being allocated for the 4-year-olds, roughly $10,000 per child versus the 3-year-olds, according to what Kathy Hochul has in her budget, which would leave a disparity amongst the 3-year-olds. So if this hasn't been approved yet, and we're trying to open up 2 schools, wouldn't that leave us at an economical deficit if indeed we did not get the $8 million to assist in what you were saying earlier? Because it's not approved yet, and it only is being allocated for what I can see Kathy Hochul saying for the 4-year-olds, not 3-year-old, not 3 at all. So I would have a problem with that. I can see possibly opening one, but if you're gonna open two and we don't have the money and it's not approved, that could be a financial catastrophe. Another question.
Can I
Oh, you
just
want- yeah,
address
go
that
ahead,
one
I'm
real
sorry.
quick?
Go ahead.
So here in our district, we currently operate a 3-year-old pre-K program. In fact, outside of New York City, we actually have the highest population of 3-year-old pre-K kids.
Right.
A part of the work of one of our local delegations, Sarah Clark, she is advocating for the governor to provide for school districts like Rochester the ability to use the pre-K funds for 3-year-old pre-K. She currently, when I say she, Governor Hochul has currently made a commitment to New York City, and Sarah Clark and her advocacy work is like, if New York City is good enough to receive it, so would Rochester. So the $8 million has not been approved. This budget that we're putting forward, once again, is based upon the governor's executive run. If anything changes in that executive run, in the final legislative enacted budget, as we've been speaking about all evening, things within this document will be adequately adjusted as well. So that results in us only having funding to open up one additional, to relocate our current pre-K program into a building that has green space and is more embraced and received by not only our teachers in that building and the administrator, but our parents as well. That will be what we do next year, just open up one. But once again, we are proposing to open up two based upon the governor's run, which is a commitment of $8 million more to the Rochester City School District.
Okay,
That's your follow-up? That's your follow-up?
I just wanted to follow it up.
No, that's fine.
to
This is
that
your
one.
follow, I just wanted.
I just wanted, Then I had, this is an actual
is your
question.
follow-up, okay.
Yeah, this is the actual question. What is the point of the instructional coaches if our students are not performing greatly at this time? And just to add to that, how many career in teaching, how many CIT teachers do we currently have as a career in teaching do we have in the district currently?
26 career and teaching staff members we currently have. Contractually, we have to have 25. I had a conversation with Dr. Urbanski today. He and I are going to be meeting to discuss this very nationally recognized program to see in what ways might we be able to provide better support. It may result in us adding additional staff. It may not. At this point in time, there's a lot of competing priorities, and as a school district, based upon the financial resources that will be allocated through state aid and grant funding, we will then be able to make the adequate adjustments. Chief Cody, can I ask you to come up? I'm pretty sure that having a different voice will sort of add to the spirit of our conversation. So can you speak a little bit about the instructional coaches, and if you can also speak to the needs assessment that we did, and given the fact that one of the big areas of great need articulated by everyone across the board, including our teachers, is greater supports in the classroom that has not yielded at this juncture the student outcomes that we all know are possible here in Rochester. So if you could speak a little bit about the instructional coaches and our plan of action to support developing the capacity of our instructional coaches so that they can then, in turn, develop the capacity of our classroom teachers and educators.
Sure. And so our instructional coach model thus far, the TOAs that have been in those positions have been used in a wide variety of ways in schools. And so as part of this TOA shift that Dr. Rosser described earlier is that we're also shifting what that role looks like to ensure that whether they're district coaches or whether they're instructional coaches in the building, that they are more teacher-facing and more supporting the capacity building in alignment with the current research-based models. So you will see as we shift this model, those teachers engaging more in the one-to-one coaching cycles to support teachers, similar to the work that our mentors do, and grounding more in those best practices, facilitating PLCs in the grade level team meetings and in the common planning times that we're trying to. Professional learning communities, sorry, that we are trying to build into the master schedules with teachers. So this shift really from some of the more non-essential work that we've been seeing them doing to be more supportive of actually taking and supporting the professional learning that teachers are getting and the application of that professional learning in their daily practice in instruction.
Okay. Thank you. Dr. Rosser, can you do me a favor too? Can you give us a possible estimate of how much it would cost to run one of those pre-K programs at the building sites that you have? Because we don't have that concrete dollar amount. We just have.
Yeah, we can provide that in the subsequent deliberations.
Thank you.
Just to piggyback off that, because we're going to go in and get some more questions. I know Vice President Malloy, I believe Commissioner Santiago may have some, and some other commissioners, but because we're in that space right now, I do want to jump in, if y'all don't mind, really quickly, because it's related to the pre-K. In regard to, so I understand the logic and all of the things happening as far as green space. We recognize where our current spaces may not be ideal when it comes to safety and exposure for some students, but we also recognize that there's a huge benefit to the centralized location that it's had. And so moving to a green space and the learning that's going to happen, and also that I appreciate the target audience that you're looking for. I just had a healthcare day at my organization where we talked about a lot of children here in Rochester not getting the pre-K learning, so they're coming into learning in the kindergarten level at a deficit. So this is wonderful, and that we need to get more kids involved. All of that is great. Do you anticipate, based on the fact that there may be 2 sites and at least 1 identified, relocating, can we anticipate increased transportation costs as a result? Because the centralized, although not ideal, I agree, it does run off the RTS bus station and things of that nature. So have we calculated like an increase in transportation as a result?
Yeah, right now, we don't provide transportation for any of our pre-K programming. Right now, our pre-K programming relies on parents taking their children to and from. We do provide passes, for those parents who may have transportation insecurities. One of the things which is why we're still dealing with a preliminary budget, decisions that have not been made in Albany. As a part of the One House budget, there is a movement that accepts the proposal for statewide universal pre-K and proposing allowing districts to receive transportation aid for UPK, which we don't currently receive. If we're given the green light to receive transportation aid for UPK, then we can most certainly develop a plan of action, contract out with a vendor, for the vendor to then provide pre-K transportation or transportation to our pre-K centers. So those are things that are still under the works, and we're advocating, I know I've advocated for having greater flexibility in how our pre-K dollars that are appropriated by the state can be used, because the transportation piece is a humongous piece.
And do you anticipate any, and my last and final follow-up to that is just anticipation of how that will impact our schools? Because we know that grade level strands being in place, if you have 1 or 2 grade level strands in a school, that impacts their enrollment and how they receive their dollars. And so in the previous plan by a previous superintendent, there was like a pre-K through 6, I believe, was one of the plans. And so if we're going to centralize the sites, are we then also
good
now
question.
taking pre-K out of
Yeah,
the schools?
it's a good question. So there will still be pre-K centers, or not pre-K centers, there will still be pre-K sections in many of our elementary schools. What we're doing is we are relocating the North Clinton site to School 39 because of safety issues, because of a number of different things. And unfortunately, I heard, I'm not certain if it's factual, that one of our parents was assaulted this afternoon outside of the building, but I haven't yet, determined whether or not the information that came to me is factual. So it is a great need, and we have parents, of course, that continuously, primarily the beginning of the school year, articulate that that particular site is not well received and embraced because of, the challenges that unfortunately are presented in that part of town at this moment. We are, of course, looking at ways in which we can increase the space in our elementary schools. As I mentioned in my opening, we're challenged with increased number of students, elementary school students, who are being classified in restrictive environments, which is resulting in us having to make decisions to move certain sections of pre-K out of our elementary buildings because we are obligated under IDA, federal law, and state law to make sure that students with exceptionalities are integrated with their peers in a school building.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Commissioner Malloy and then to Commissioner Santiago.
Thank you. And I just want to also thank President Simmons for talking about pre-K, and also the question by Commissioner Griffin about information regarding the pre-K centers. I would be very interested to get budget information on those 2 centers because I don't know where to find that in the budget book. But any information that could be provided would be appreciated. But my question is, currently the district, we have a very big dependence on contract substitute services. There's a big dependence on it, and I'm just wondering, does this budget address those contract substitutes? I'd love to know where I can find that information, and how do you envision we lessen that dependence on contract substitutes? We want to make sure that we have certificated teachers in front of all of our students, in all of our classrooms, but how do we ensure that we lessen that dependence?
So I'm going to answer the question in 2 folds. So we have what we have in our school district, which is very unique for a school district. We have essentially a temporary agency that's assisting us with identifying positions that are for vacancies. So that organization is called TESS. Not certain as to what TESS stands for, but we have a substantial contract with TESS. One of the things that we did with this budget is we pushed the actual funding for TESS positions. That would be paraprofessionals, that may be clerical, that may be other positions that are civil service in nature. We push those budgets back into each of the school budgets. So when you look at the individual school budgets, you will see a great increase of contractual lines because those dollars have been removed centrally and placed back into the schools that are utilizing TESS membership. As it relates to contract substitutes, in the school district, of course, every school district has substitutes that it utilizes. If I'm not mistaken, team, and please correct me, I think contractually we need to have employed 25 substitutes throughout our buildings. So that's going to be something that, per the contract, remains in place. Our goal, of course, particularly through our Teach Rochester efforts and some efforts that we're having with organizations about ways in which we can recruit more certificated teachers from New York City. As those continue, we're hoping to decrease our reliance on substitutes to be able to fill these classrooms. And the other piece too, I just want to sort of highlight something that we articulated in our March presentation around the budget, which we first articulated in our February 26th presentation, that the goal is to get more certificated teachers in our classrooms because, number one, it's an accountability measure. And those of us who, let me retract that. It's an accountability measure, and there's research that speaks to the success of a certificated teacher over one that is not certificated.
I guess then the follow-up is just, do you anticipate the executive run having any type of impact on that aspect of the budget?
The executive run, which is the governor's run?
Yeah, like.
No, because, the governor doesn't take that into consideration when, and I don't see, and I did pass out a copy of the One House budget, and I highlighted things that will most certainly benefit, or may benefit Rochester.
I mean,
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, one of the things that we're looking to do, of course, with our financial resources is to make sure that a number of things that are going to strengthen our organization, such as teacher recruitment and retention, that those are a part of our budget moving forward as well, or continue to be a part of our budget moving forward.
thank you.
I just want to do a brief time check. It's 7:56, but I am allowing for more than 2 questions from commissioners because, again, we have quite a few, and I want to make sure that we are in a space where we can vote on this budget and support it because we have understanding and clarity. And so with that, Commissioner Santiago?
Just a question about the programs section of the conversation tonight. From page 57, under agency youth, we have deductions there, and the deductions are around programs for students with disabilities, English language learners, and also guidance/regular school. Those are things that were budgeted for in the previous year, and now those things are blank, including the English language learners section and the guidance section. There's a major cut in the programs for student with disabilities section. In 2026, 227,000. This year, 74,000. I'm just wondering what's going on with that, because I know agency youth are usually our students from welfare, unless I'm wrong. Somebody can correct me if I'm totally off.
He's
57.
57, yeah.
So yeah, I would like an explanation on why those things are no longer accounted for.
Okay. That's a great question, and I'm just going to reiterate. This budget is built off of the governor's run. When we look at the adopted budget from last year, that was built off of the legislative enacted budget. Once we receive our funding from the state, the numbers throughout this, the allocations throughout this budget will change. So we're kind of comparing, apples to oranges right now or apples to seedlings, because the seed of the apple seed has not yet sprouted for us to be able to do a fair comparison between the adopted budget and the proposed budget. The one thing I will share is that if you look further down, and Mike, you might need to sort of share around this. If you look under, in that second box, under programs with students with disabilities, the adopted budget for last year showed 76,000, but the proposed budget for students with disabilities shows 222,000. It's not shown in that top area, but it's shown down at the bottom. And also for English language learners, there was 29,000 that was shown, that was adopted last year. And right now, what we're proposing is $73,000 or $72,000. Mike, do you want to talk a little bit about the differences between, the top box and the bottom box? I know one has to do with school base and one has to do with district base.
Yeah, both programs we evaluated along with the home and hospital into where the employees were actually spending their time.
Mike, get right into the mic.
Yeah.
No pun
Sorry.
intended, please. Thank you.
And so some of the allocations were changed between the two departments are headed by the same person. So you do see that there are some shifts from agency youth to youth and justice, and that is more based on the time that those teachers were actually spending in those two programs. So we did some reallocations there. And that includes like the people who attend the Monroe County Jail and whatnot are teachers who go in there and teach those students.
Okay, thank you. And last point, just a quick follow-up. I know part of the conversation was about the budget book and how it's formatted. I think it would have been good with dropping this, and it might be there, so if it's there, I apologize. But just making it clear, either having a page on the front of this page of this book or something that's going out with it, just to be clear that there's not a budget from the state that we're going off of. And so this is, like you've explained in this meeting, every parent, every community member isn't watching this meeting, so they might go on the website and see it and then think that this is, what's being proposed. So it might, just as a recommendation, it might be good to put that forewarning and that disclaimer out for everybody.
Ron?
Yeah, but I keep hearing that, and I just have to say, every government budget is ran on this draft version. So this is not new this year, it has nothing to do with what's happening at the federal level. The expectation of the administration is to present a balanced budget based on the runs. Doesn't matter that there may be more money or less money, the expectation is that this is the budget. So the conversation that I keep hearing, and I could be incorrect in my interpretation, so let me be clear, because it really sounds like you're saying we're gonna be adding stuff back after the governor's run, and that is not how a budget deliberation and a draft works. You're supposed to budget realistically with what we think and assume, and 100% the budget will change, because yes, historically, the budget will pass at some point and we'll have actual numbers, and then it will be the responsibility of our finance team to make those adjustments. That budget then goes, that can happen after we vote. I want to be clear, so the draft that you all are voting on, that is the budget. So I hear you, Isaiah, and I want to be clear to listening family members who may not be paying attention to your point to all of this, but we should not have a draft budget today that looks so fundamentally different from the day that we vote to the day that the governor and legislators pass their budget and it trickles down. And it just feels like the conversation keeps getting thrown out there. And I know that there's a lot of new commissioners and folks are still learning, but that is not how this works. And I just had to say that for the record. I just want to also uplift the conversation around the subs being centralized versus decentralizing. There is a reason why it was centralized. The state monitor will have follow-up conversations with the administration, because I do think it's too large of a conversation to have in one little budget deliberation, but there is a lot of history there with the state pushing that and that being part of the previous individuals here, and so I'll let them go through that history. But I just have to say that.
Yeah.
So whatever is on this budget is my expectation that if you're gonna have a second draft that you wanna propose, that it's a little bit more aligned, but it should not be more than a 1% to 3% range in these changes and numbers. So if it's gonna be more than that, then this is an incorrect draft. Currently added state, and we need an actual draft that is 1% to 3% of margin within what the governor will approve. Thank you.
Yep,
Thank
we're on
you,
the same
Commissioner
page.
LeBron. And those points were brought up, and before you made it up, we did touch on having those contingency, and I think you brought it out even more succinctly around the 1% to 2%, the 3% and all that good stuff. But the need for the projected numbers based on what we typically see in runs, so that we have an anticipated understanding of what we will have in front of us. So that is, thank you for bringing that back into play, and we have a plan for that. And that information should be forthcoming. Commissioner McCullough.
Yeah, actually, thank you, Commissioner LeBron. You've answered a lot of information for me right then, so I really don't have anything else to say.
Okay. Next, Commissioner, before I go to you, Commissioner Feynman, did you have anything or no? I'm just trying to make sure I'm not missing hands as I go. Commissioner Griffin?
I don't know if you can answer this tonight, but I would like for the record to have a breakdown of I see a difference. Let me back up. I see a difference in the amount of money that's given to the Chiefs this year versus next year by $200,000, I think, give or take. And I just want to know, like, the breakdown of, we're talking over $1 million. It was $1 million last year, now it's 1.2. What is actually, and I was trying to find the page for everybody in the listening audience. I apologize for that. Why is their budget so high for the Chiefs, and how that money is allocated is what I would like to know. I know are we doing the school-based budgeting? So that's in addition to the Chiefs having that versus the school-based budgeting that we're doing now?
Yeah, we can provide more of a breakdown, particularly during our next budget deliberation, where we're going to have more of a conversation around the administrative supports. But one of the things I do want to sort of highlight, since you brought it up, is that currently on the books, we have 4 school chiefs. As a part of the reductions that are being made here at central office, we are reducing the number of school chiefs down to 3 from 4. So some of the funding that you see that is being allocated is actually still being sort of not mushed, but being transitioned from that other school chief's office and responsibility over to the other school chiefs. So as I mentioned, it's a great question, and when we have our next budget deliberation, we will have a prepared outline as to how those dollars are utilized and what they're utilized for.
Yeah, can you, and just to help me out, or I don't know if it can help anybody else out, I would like to compare from one year to the other. And with this money, what has been a significant progress with the money they've used? What did they use it for? And how's it advanced our children in any type of way, shape, form, or fashion? That breakdown of that and how these monies are allocated are crucial for myself as a commissioner. I don't know about how anyone else would feel, but this is a pocket of money that I feel maybe should not be, given so freely out to everyone. I think we have too much money allocated to too many different people in Rochester City School District. Hence the reason why we're probably at a budget deficit, because we can't find out where the money is at sometimes because you have so many hands in the pot. So it would be instrumental for us to start tapping in and finding out how these monies are allocated to different places and for what reasons, and making sure we have, a running database or data, running data saying how this money is allocated. Thank you.
Commissioner Griffin. I don't think I see any additional hands at this time. And I before we close out this session, and I want to make sure I'm not missing any hands. Am I correct in that? With that, before we close out, I want to kind of put a point on what Commissioner LeBron brought out and also what was attempted to be brought out at the top of the session, again, with the understanding that there are projections and trends on what typically comes from the governor's run and all of these pieces. And although all the puzzle pieces will not be substantiated, if you will, there is a trend that we can reference and project certain things. And I'm bringing this point to us because we will have second round deliberations. For example, the timeline I have in front of me says by April 17th, we would be submitting a second round of questions to the administration. And of course, we as commissioners want to ensure that our questions are informed based on where our district is going. So is there any type of clarity or timeline around when we will have numbers in front of us, or are these that are in alignment with the projected run based on what it typically has been, or do you feel like that this has captured it?
Well, it's really up to the commissioners. If you want us, particularly around the 3.5 million and the 1.4 million that we're anticipating receiving through receivership, to update the budget book and get you an updated budget book, we most certainly can do that. Given our timeline, that may not be the best course of action, but if it's something that the commissioners would like us to do, we most certainly will do so.
So I'm just speaking more so to having just accuracy. For example, again, we have positions that may be getting cut, and we're having these conversations. We're going to have people coming in on April 21st to advocate for the home health positions and the social workers and all of those things. And if those positions are not necessarily going to look like they do in this budget, will we anticipate information prior to that?
Yeah, we can most certainly get information. You know, I made reference earlier that even when it comes to the home hospital, that the cut in the budget book of 32 is not accurate at this point in time because we did reinstate some additional positions today. So we most certainly can provide updates. If it's not updates to the entire budget book, we can most certainly provide updates to the critical areas that have been articulated, which would be home hospital, social workers, school counselors, and that was it.
Yeah.
Can I ask-
Those, those pieces, I want to kind of put a point on this at
Go
this
ahead, no,
time.
I want to ask Jaime something.
Okay, so with that said, I want to go over this timeline one last time. Today's the 14th, and on the 17th, a couple days from now, we should be submitting second round questions. Actually, those are responses to questions that we presented, if they haven't been answered in totality. On April 20th, that's final administrative supports questions. Those are going to be due. On April 21st, we'll have a public budget hearing. And April 27th, we will be meeting with the city council. And on April 28th, we'll have our second budget deliberation. And to Commissioner Santiago's point, unless we have additional clarity, we might want to take a look at some things so that May 5th is coming, and they're expecting a vote. And I do want to allow for you to ask a question, and after your question, then I would like the state monitor to just weigh in on this budget deliberation. Matter of fact, if you could weigh in, no, go ahead and ask your question, and then I'll ask that you weigh in, sir.
Excuse me, I was trying to look for it, and I couldn't remember. We did so much back and forth. Were our board goals approved by the state? Was that approved?
The board goals were approved by the board. And
By
they
the
were
board, but not
included-
by the
Not
state.
by the state.
Okay.
They were included in the academic plan that we sent to the state, but the academic plan and the financial plan was approved by the board.
But not by the state?
The state is making sure that we are implementing that plan because the board made a commitment to
Right,
that
but
plan.
it hasn't been approved by the state, right?
It doesn't
plan-
need to be approved
Yes.
by the state.
Why I'm questioning it is, and I want to make sure that the board goals are aligned with the state.
Yep.
And if they are out of line with the state, we need to make sure they are in line with the state so that we are not getting dinged at the end and we're taking a big hit for something that should have been a priority and it has not been put in place. So I think the board needs to make sure that we are aligned with the state's priorities and the goals that they have set for us so that we, at the end, are not holding the bag. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And just for clarity, the Board of Education sets their priorities and goals, which we have. And to your point, Commissioner Griffin, we do have commissioners that are currently looking at our handbook and all of these, our board goals and all those type of things to make sure that the academic plan and all of our policies and things of that are in alignment. So thank you for your concerns. Back to the budget deliberation, if you could weigh in on this process, or anything that you would ask of the board or insights you'd like to provide at this time, State Monitor.
Thank you, President Simmons. Great discussion that took place today. I do agree with Commissioner LeBron that the budget draft that you received should be the budget that you will be approving soon, taking into consideration that this is only the governor's, but sometimes that budget does not change a lot. So I want to commend the superintendent for the responses that he has given this evening. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, and also to remind the board and to remind the superintendent that one of the recommendations that I made during my presentation is be part of the discussion in case that there's going to be some restorations back to the budget. That is very important. I know that the board has some goals. I know that there's a strategic plan, but I just want to remind the board, based on also the comment, the question that Commissioner Griffin asked, that the budget has to be aligned with the academic and the financial plan that was submitted and that was approved by the Board of Education.
By the Board of Education?
Yes.
Not the
by
state?
By the Board of
For
Education.
the Board of Education. And that's what I want to just make that clarity, that the Board of Education runs the Board of Education, but we can be in line with the state, but we run this. And so with that said, do we need to adjourn formally, or are we just done? So motion to adjourn this meeting, and that was by Commissioner LeBron. Second, somebody.
Second.
Vice President Malloy, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Good night.